tasteMAKERS was funded in part by...
What does a craftsperson look like? Is it this? Or this? Or is it this? Is it possible a craftsperson might also look like this? Edward Jones salutes the makers who share their expertise and take pride in their craft.
And by Fleischmann's Yeast. And A.B. Mowry.
In a once-abandoned textile mill here in Saxbahaw, North Carolina, about an hour outside of Raleigh-Durham, there is now a thriving hub of artisans and makers. And in this episode of tasteMAKERS, you are going to meet Ross Flynn of Left Bank Butchery. I'm Kat Neville, and I've been telling the story of local food for about 20 years. In that time, I've seen the American food movement explode in tiny towns and big cities from coast to coast. In tasteMAKERS, I explore the maker movement and take you along for the journey to meet the makers who define the flavor of American cuisine. Here in a tiny unincorporated town in North Carolina, there is a butcher shop that exemplifies what can happen when makers and producers collaborate. Ross Flynn at Left Bank Butchery works with only one hog farm and one cattle operation to produce steaks, chops, and charcuterie here in Saxbahaw, North Carolina.
I was leaving New York City, and right when I was leaving New York, the debacle of 2008 was happening, and nobody was quite sure what was happening to the economy. And it all came from things like mortgage-backed securities and things that nobody had really, most people hadn't heard of. And here I was working on the farm, and that made a lot of sense. Community spirit in Saxbahaw has been here for long, long before there were any businesses here in town. So none of it is new. Things were, within walking distance. There's a beautiful river and beautiful trails and everything else. I think the businesses have added to that and have helped even further that community spirit here in town.
The lower mill, which was the cotton mill, was built in 1844, really historic building. The upper mill, which is what we call this building, is a more recent build. It was at the beginning of the century. And at one point, it came to pass that this building might get knocked down, and we were really devastated to hear that. About 2008, we started thinking about how this building could be used for the community as the community was starting to re-establish itself after the decline of the textile industry in North Carolina. I think you're seeing a successful resurgence of the rural rehab movement, which is lovely because you get the best of both worlds. You get a city-ish feeling in these gorgeous old buildings that you can redo, and you can redo them with geothermal and solar like we have here, where you're really repurposing with intention, with environmental thought. We wanted to reuse the buildings that were here and not make new buildings and keep the riverside protected.
I started butchering because, first and foremost, moving the entire animal. Restaurants want only specific cuts, and customers really only want specific cuts. And that's, of course, not really what we do at the farm. We don't raise ribeyes and pork chops, but we raise whole animals.
Ross practices what is called seam butchery. And what that means is that as a butcher, he follows the seams of the muscles all the way down to the bone, where traditional American-style butchery makes cross cuts that include multiple muscle groups. Seam butchery isolates those muscles so that each steak is only one muscle itself.
The best example that I can think of is the chuck just refers to the shoulder of a cow. Well, there's lots of different muscles that are going on in the shoulder. And likewise, if you get a chuck roast, it's normally cut into a square, which is, it's not the way muscles really come. And so in that square roast, there's a lot of different muscles in there. Some of them are tough, depending on, you know, what they do for the animal. Some of them are tough, and some of them are tender. If you have a roast and some of the muscles are tough, then you have to just assume that all of them are tough, and you have to cook accordingly. And that's why chuck roasts get put into people's crock pot, or however you want to braise meat. What we'll actually do is pull out each one of those muscles, because some of those muscles in a chuck roast are actually quite tender. And we are able to then offer it to somebody who wants to grill out and maybe doesn't want to spend as much money as a ribeye or a filet mignon or something like that. And we can offer them and say, here's something, it's less expensive, but it too can be grilled. And then somebody else who comes in and actually does want to use the crock pot, we can give them the proper muscle. We're involved in this type of butchery and this type of agriculture because we believe that we're modeling natural systems. People have been eating animals for a long time, and we've been doing it in a way that wasn't harmful to the environment. It doesn't get lost on anybody at the butcher shop that we're dealing with animals that live across the street. Those two things stay in balance, that I can both love the animals and loved raising them, and also knowing that they would eventually, you know, be turned into something at the butcher shop.
Heritage breeds are animals that prevailed before the introduction of industrial agriculture. With names like Duroc and Old Spot, these pigs thrive in outdoor conditions and they deliver amazing flavor.
They've been bred to be hardy, to live outdoors. These pigs have been around for centuries, and they were living outdoors, so of course their immune systems are tough, their trotters, their feet are tough, and they can live in different temperatures. All of those qualities make them great to continue to raise outdoors.
The model at Left Bank Butchery is incredibly unique, and Ross practices what he calls ultimate transparency. He only partners with one beef supplier and one pork supplier, and we're gonna go and meet up with Eliza here at Cane Creek Farm and meet those pigs.
Come here. Boop, boop. They're pretty mellow. My daughter used to ride them.
What attracted you to hog farming?
The unknown. Nobody was doing it, and nobody was doing it the way that seemed a natural way to go, and I feel like pigs were kind of getting the bad rap of all the confinement animals. As soon as I saw those big pigs and looked at their human-like eyes and realized kind of how dignified and smart they were, I was really interested in providing that life that they would feel that dignity and be themselves in. You know, I'm doing it for the animals, even though we're eating them, but it should be a special thing, I think. It's healthier for the land, it's healthier for the consumer, and it's certainly healthier for the pigs.
Eliza has such a great way of moving the animals around, fitting vegetables into the growing system over there, moving pigs out of pens and turning that into the gardens, and then moving the animals back into the garden after the season.
So many people don't think of pigs as forest animals?
Well, chickens, turkeys, pigs, they basically live in the woods, in the wild, and they prefer it. And they don't sweat, so they need shade from the sun. They need protection from the cold. The only thing that they regulate their body temperature with their fat.
Well, and so you use the pigs to kind of manage the land.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how does that work?
Their natural composting ability, i.e. the fact that they eat everything, if you don't keep them in a place too long, really enhance its productivity. They, in my opinion, can't be the only thing I raise because they're beating this place to a pulp in a way, but they're also clearing it for others. So if I let them do the tilling for my gardens and just lightly turn in their feces and the roots of the cover crop they've just eaten, for example, I'm getting a really nice, nutrient-rich topsoil recreating. But that's because I'm moving the pigs. And when you move them, the grass will come back, but to promote the grass to continue coming back, it's helpful to have somebody eat the grass and then poop the grass out. Now, pigs will eat the grass too, but they're also digging up the roots. Bring in the goats and the sheep and the cows, they're just clipping it and they're promoting root health. So that grass is going to come back even faster after they've eaten it down one time. The chickens are important because they're scratching up all the dung of everybody. So they're dispersing that and making more bioavailable fertilizer because they're spreading it even more than the animals were already naturally doing it. It's incredible how fast everything grows with all of that fertility in there. Mother Nature hates a monoculture, and that's something that we've done to our sort of farming practices nationwide. Fence row to fence row of corn and soybeans and animals kept inside. And what I want to see is an interplay of all of that.
I've never met anybody in my life who loves animals more than Eliza. She has a farrowing house attached to her house, which is really not something you can find anywhere. She'll bring in the sows to farrow to have their babies, and it's literally built onto their house because that's where they're most comfortable.
It's a lot of fun to raise animals, and I think that they generally make us more human, more patient, more humble, more kind. I guess the bottom line would be that this methodology made sense 100 years ago. It still makes sense today. I believe there's room for all of us. I think it's a great option.
Charcuterie is a catch-all term for sort of changing the form of meat, typically pork, and to somehow fabricate it and turn it into something that really has kind of a different purpose than what it started out as. So it would include your dry cured meats like bacons, brining that we do with our hams, that would be part of it. Some people include sausage making into it, but certainly any of our smoked sausages. And then your pâtés and your terrines. We take a lot of pride, I think, at Left Bank in adhering to some tradition. And guanciale has been around for a long time. Now we're trying to replicate what has been perfected over centuries. That ties us back to food and to tradition in a way that's actually, I think, more satisfying than saying, I created a new recipe that's never been had before. Because we're a butcher shop, we're actually not allowed to sell off-site any of our charcuterie. And so we created basically a food truck that doesn't have any cooking equipment on it. And that allows us to take our product off-site.
To extend the reach of their businesses, Ross and Eliza have partnered on an incredibly unique mobile butcher shop. They're here at the Braeburn Farmers Market, so let's go check in.
We are able to bring really everything that we make at the butcher shop. So we can bring charcuterie, everything can be brought to order. If somebody says they want thick bacon, we put it on the slicer, we cut it right here. So this is basically a food truck with no cooking equipment on it. trying to bring the whole butcher shop experience and then combine it with, you know, where everybody loves to shop, which is outdoors at a beautiful market with the farmers. We think, what would we want as customers? And that's what I would want. I would want to be able to ask Eliza all the questions about, you know, how she raises the pigs. I would want to ask, you know, either myself or one of the other butchers, what's in every product, how do you make it, and also how do you cook everything that they're taking home.
And our next stop is here at Braeburn Farms, where Charles Cinder is raising red Devon cattle entirely on grass.
In 2001, I made the decision to go into the grass-fed beef business. Worst offender in terms of putting carbon into the atmosphere has been land use. That we plow the land, oxidize the carbon, goes right back up where it came from. Turn it around the other way. What if we want to put it back? A plant, a grass leaf, sticks out, it takes in CO2, forms sugars, they go down, they produce an exudate that feeds the bacteria, the fungi, all the critters that live in the soil. The cow comes along, snips it off, processes it, puts it back in a plant-available form, and then a little carbon stays in the ground, and we just do it over and over and over again. So the cow can really be a wonderful tool if it's used in the right way. For instance, you take a cow, put them in the feedlot, and what do you have? You have mounds of toxic waste. Put the same cow out on a pasture, and it's fertilized.
Charles employs a system of intense rotational grazing, which means he's taking these cows and moving them to a new patch of grass every single day.
There are 35 pastures on the farm. When I started, the farm would have just been one big pasture. And what that's led to is that we move our cows every day. And sort of the short course on grazing is you want a lot of cows on a small area for a short time with a long rest period. And that's, in essence, what we do. If we take a single cow, put her in a 10-acre pasture, she will overgraze that pasture because she will go around the pasture, eat everything she likes, wait until it grows an inch, eat it again, and ultimately she destroys the very thing she likes. And that's what would happen when you just put cows in a large area and allow them to do what they want to do. What we do now is we move the cows into a small area so that everybody knows they better get busy and eat, because if they don't eat, their neighbor's going to get it. And so they graze the land much more evenly than they would being spread out. So they come in, they eat it down, and then we move them, and we move them, and we move them. And so each of the 35 pastures may be broken down into as many as 10 more.
What is the value of saving and then also restoring farmland?
I think the value of saving farmland is that farmland is our last best method of putting carbon back in the soil. Approximately 1% soil organic matter increase is 10 tons of carbon stored in the ground. So in essence, let's say we started in this field 30 years ago with 2%, and now we have 9%. So that's 70 tons of carbon per acre, or in this pasture, 700 tons of carbon have been sequestered in the soil.
Just look at how high this pasture is. These grasses are incredibly thick and dense, and it's all because of the health of the soil.
I do charge a premium price for these animals, so I'm getting a considerable amount more for my beef animal than, say, a guy in a feedlot. And I'm not subject to the vagaries of a commodity market. For instance, Ross and I settle on the price of beef for the year. All right, so we are not subject to a commodity market, which can be brutal. Cow-calf operators all over the country can be in serious trouble one year and in high cotton in another year. And it's very difficult to manage your life when it's going from boom to bust. And what we've tried to do is just to keep it up. And for Ross, it's really important that he use the whole cow. And in addition to that, it needs to be local. It needs to be really good. And so we just developed the partnership that allows me to actually finish animals and then actually hold them. So it was the idea of having one farm produce a really high quality product on a very consistent basis. And that's very hard to do.
I knew that when I started the butcher shop that I cared so much about where the food was sourced, but I've come to realize that I care every bit as much about cooking and that people feel comfortable again in their kitchens. I don't think that the food system's really going to change unless people feel empowered in their own kitchen. I think that that's where you make the biggest impact on food sourcing, and I think that brings food back to an even more primal thing than just taste or experience that you get at a restaurant. I mean, eating, providing for the people you love and sitting around a table and sharing it together is gonna be able to reach a different level than any restaurant experience ever is. Ultimately, the food that you share around a kitchen table is always going to be more powerful. And that's why your grandmother's lasagna is the greatest lasagna you've ever had, and you can't replicate that, is because it was made with love and it was shared around a table with loved ones.
So as we've heard, Ross is incredibly dedicated to making sure that his customers know how to actually cook with these products that he's carrying. So we're gonna go inside of one of his classes and learn from him directly. Follow me.
I know all of you are pretty well familiar with the shop and understand that we buy whole animals from Eliza and from Charles. And because of that, we wind up also with, we try and pull out a lot of different steaks. If you've been into the shop before, you've seen lots of steaks, probably ones that you're not at all familiar with. And the reason we do these cooking classes is just to take away some of the mystery of all that. So tonight we're just gonna go over the basic ways to cook meat, fast cooking and braising. All meat in America is priced according to how tender it is, okay? So if you also understand that, you can kind of work backwards and figure out where the best deals are, because notice I didn't say that the price of meat has to do with what tastes the best, it just has to do with how tender something is. So really all meat is priced according to how long it takes to make tender. The browning that's going on the surface of the meat, okay, is you're building flavor compounds. Logan's then going to work to not only get good browning on the meat itself, but then afterward, any browning that happens in the skillet, he's gonna work to try and get those flavor compounds off of the bottom of the skillet as well. This is a beef shank, okay? Beef shank is what the cow's been walking on all day long. You can see all the connective tissue in here. That's actually not fat, that's connective tissue. Connective tissue is obviously really tough, but if we cook that connective tissue long enough and slow enough, it will actually basically melt away. And what goes from this really tough, unfortunate thing in a piece of meat actually becomes this really unctuous, amazing thing. It's not really fatty, but it's kind of got a lot of body. So right now, all the browning flavors that were left in the bottom of the pan are getting, the vegetables are picking them up. So I'm gonna cook this until these vegetables start to caramelize some. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for joining me in North Carolina, and I will see you next time. There's more information on the makers featured in this series, along with recipes and extra videos at wearetastemakers.com.
tasteMAKERS was funded in part by
What does a craftsperson look like? Is it this? Or this? Or is it this? Is it possible a craftsperson might also look like this? Edward Jones salutes the makers who share their expertise and take pride in their craft.
and by Fleischmann's Yeast and A.B. Mowry.